Imposter syndrome, or you don't feel very confident in the new role.
Expectations, make them really clear, explain the why. If I could replay this situation, what would I tell them? Make your decision on that and then set an equal standard for everyone. Leadership is hard. You gotta own that. Just hearing other people deal with the same stuff, it helps people realize I'm not alone. You gotta practice giving that message.
Welcome back to Self-Aware Leader with Jason Rigby. Ever wonder how some leaders just seem to get it? Today, we're unlocking those secrets with Bobby Powers. I know, guys, amazing name. I was talking to him offline on that. He is an expert dedicated to helping you become a more effective leader. And 70 plus books, Bobby, 70 plus books a year. You've done this for a decade, you said.
Yeah, for a decade, 70 books a year. I started doing this back when I was in grad school. I started getting into nonfiction, and I started with Malcolm Gladwell. So big gateway drug to nonfiction, right? And I read a Malcolm Gladwell book called Blink that just blew my mind.
Yes.
And I started to realize that the topics were coming up in my conversations with friends. It was connected to things I was doing in grad school and work. And so I just got addicted to this idea of learning new things that I could actually use in my daily life. And so that really kicked me off on it.
Yeah, no, it's awesome. And so, I met you on Substack.
Yeah.
Which is, you have bobbypowers.com, and then your Substack is what?
Yeah, it's Leader and Learner. Leader and Learner on Substack. So hit me up on there. I love Substack because it's a chance to build connections with all these people that are passionate about the same things. And for me, it's leading and it's learning. So sharing notes about reading, about note taking, about all the nerdy stuff that I'm into.
Yeah, and one of the nerdy things that we're going to talk about today that both of us are into is new managers. And this is something that I get tons of DMs on this. That's why I was excited talking to you on this. I'll get 20, 25, 30, 35-year-old leaders that are out there, and they were maybe great in sales, or they, stumbled upon a position because they knew somebody, and they face challenges, and it's kind of hard for them to be this individual contributor. Maybe they even excelled at it, to all of a sudden becoming a leader. And there's a ton of mistakes they make. And I want to start off with what are the consequences of a new manager continuing to do their individual contributor job instead of delegating to others?
Yeah, so there's two big consequences from it. One is the consequence to the manager themselves, and the second is the consequence to their team. So first, for the manager themselves, massive consequences, you end up getting burnt out. There's just way more stuff than you can do if you're trying to do your old job and your new job. And so what I see a lot of managers doing is they gravitate toward what is safe. What is the safest stuff is what I was doing yesterday before I got promoted. Before I got promoted, I was pounding out all these sales. I was the closer, or I was a financial analyst that was closing all of these cases in our team queue. And that feels safe, and they know they're good at it. And that's why they got promoted. And so they gravitate toward that. But then they quickly realize, all the managers that I train realize I can't do both. I can't do both. And so they end up realizing they have to relinquish, they have to give up some of that stuff. And that means you have to trust your team. So that kind of gets into the second part is if you're taking on too much of that old work, it really hobbles your team because they don't get the chance to develop. You're taking all these development opportunities away from them, and they don't get the chance to do all the things that you used to do. That's the individual contributor work that you're probably hogging some of that best stuff. You need to hand it over to them.
Yeah, and I see this so many times, and I can remember when I was the first manager, you almost get two jobs because you're not willing to relinquish. Like you said, I'm going to come in there and I'm a great closer, so I'm just going to close all the deals because now I can talk to everybody. So I'm going to do everybody's closing of everybody's deals. And then it feeds my ego. And then at the same time, now I got all these managerial responsibilities. So some of us will suffer in silence and we'll just work 6-7 days a week,
Right. And I see that happen all the time. So my daily job, I'm the director of learning and development for a company called Jitasa. And I get the chance to teach and train and develop managers and executives. And I've done the same kind of work at multiple startups and small businesses. And undoubtedly, every new manager ends up running into the same kind of problem, is that they get promoted. They got promoted because they were good at doing the thing, but then they don't realize that this manager role is a completely different thing. It's something that's totally different, and you're not paid anymore to do the work yourself. You're paid to manage the people that do the work. You're paid to get the best work out of them and to develop those people. And it's really a massive paradigm shift that is tough for people to get down.
Yeah, and that's something I want to, this delegating part. What is that? Like, how do you catch yourself? Is there like this self-awareness part, aspect of it where you're trying to look and say, Like for me, it's kind of like, oh, can I delegate this? I'm always asking that question now.
Yeah.
How do you get to that point, as a brand new manager where you start being comfortable delegating?
Yeah, it's tough because really it comes down to oftentimes that lack of trust that we were talking about. And it
Mm.
reminds me of a story of some leaders that I worked with back about a decade ago. Two different leaders that I was working with, that they were dealing with one of the most strategic clients that we had at our company. A client that was paying us $1 million plus per year, one client. And these two leaders were taking on all of the work for that client. And I and other leaders had encouraged them through the months, delegate more, delegate more, delegate more, because I saw how much they were working. They were in the office at like 9 p.m. and I saw they're burning themselves out. And then finally it hit a boiling point, and I hated the fact that it hit this boiling point, but it hit this boiling point of they pulled me into a conference room, these two people, and they broke down crying. It's two grown men crying in a conference room with me saying, I'm about to lose my marriage. My kids never see me. I'm in the office constantly. And it really came down to this lack of delegation. And it was so sad to see that because I'm someone who I really care about the harmony between work and life. I really care about people getting time with their family, people getting time with their friends. And these two people were just broken down. And unfortunately, the core of it was they weren't delegating. And so when I dove into that with them and started to have this deeper conversation about it, they said, well, one time I gave this work to another team member and they screwed it up. And so I don't trust them to do it anymore. And so the rule I've started using in these situations is what I call the 80% rule. If someone can do something at least 80% as well as you can do it, depending on the thing, that might be good enough. And so if you use that 80% rule, you can use it for tasks, but you can also use it for meetings and you can use it for decisions. If you use the 80% rule, you ask yourself, does my attendance in this meeting, does my attendance on this client call make the meeting at least 20% better? If it doesn't, I don't probably need to be there. Somebody else can do it 80% as well as I can. Somebody can make this decision at least 80% as well as I can. So if you use that 80% rule, I have found that's a really good proxy for you to decide what can I delegate, what can I trust other people to do? And if it's really important, they can get 80% of the way there, and then you help them take it the final 100%.
Yeah, that's so good. I think, Bobby, a lot of times, another thing too, it's like what you said earlier is the trust. It's kind of and one of the things I had to learn for myself was like, I was joking around with myself. I was like, you idiot, you haven't even got done with this task yet. You haven't even started it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're going to wait and do this at some point in the future because you're worried about this person that's sitting over there not doing anything, playing solitaire on their computer. They've asked you 3 times to do that project.
Right.
It's so crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. We all make that mistake, though. It's not a unique Jason problem. It's not just a Bobby problem. It's every manager globally seems to have the same kind of issue. And it's because it is really hard. A lot of the stuff that you and I try to dive into every day with the books we read, the stuff we write about, it's the tough stuff. It's the difficult stuff of it's not just, making easy decisions. It's delegation is really difficult. And I know why people struggle with it. But at the end of the day, delegation, if you can get it right, is a superpower.
Yes.
It really fuels you and your leadership, and it really improves your team because you need to flip the way you're thinking about it and think about it not just as something to get rid of your own work. It's something to help your people learn new things. And I think that's the shift that a lot of people need to make with delegation.
Yeah, it's I always envision it like I'm by myself and here is 10 plates I'm trying to spin on these dowels. Now I have another person come in and they're helping me spin a couple. And then I have another person come in, they're helping me spin. And then before you know it, each person has their own plate and they're going to make sure that plate doesn't fall. Right. Because that's all they're focused on is that one thing. And I think it's so important. I also feel, and we'll get into this, when a new manager comes in, I think a lot of times they don't want to, especially if they're younger. Maybe they're younger than, maybe they're 27 and they're a superstar. And I've gotten this question too. It's like, what happens when everybody that you're leading is older, And these new managers come in and you get imposter syndrome. Or you don't feel very confident in the new role. What do you do or how do you teach to help people with that?
Yeah, so we'll flash back in my career. When I got done with grad school, I went to grad school at a college called Willamette University in Salem, Oregon. Finished up. I had studied all this stuff about how to analyze financial statements and how to pitch venture capitalists and how to lead teams. So I kind of graduate and I have all this burst of confidence and ego thinking, I've got it. I can do this. But then I dive into my first real big kid job, and that was assistant store manager at Target. So I was working at a Target store. I was in charge of a logistics team of 50 people, working in the back room and stocking the shelves. And I showed up day one, and you get your teeth kicked in a little bit, right? It's not the hypothetical book knowledge that I had been studying in school. It's the real world stuff of I'm a 22-year-old guy, whatever, leading a team of 65-year-olds. This is their last job before they retire, and leading a team of 16-year-olds. It's their first job they've ever had. Neither one of them wanted to listen to me for good reason, right? I'm the young buck that comes in as the new executive of the store. And so I started to feel like I don't have what it takes. And I've had a few points in time that I hit that imposter syndrome of thinking I'm kind of a fraud. And so then I started to go and look at resources and try to figure out, am I the only person that feels like this? And it turns out I'm not. A lot of people feel like this. And so now when I train managers every day, one of the biggest things that I train in my new manager boot camp that I offer a couple times a year to our new leads is I talk about imposter syndrome directly, and I get people to open up about it. And what I've noticed is that just hearing other people deal with the same stuff, that firstly helps people realize I'm not alone. Okay, I'm not in this alone. Everybody feels like this. Nobody feels confident fully. That's okay. The other thing I tell everybody to do is keep a record of your successes. So this is a little bit like nerdy of a thing that I do, but I have an email folder that I call gas in the tank. And it's anytime I get kudos from my boss, anytime I have a client email that says, hey, you did a really good job on this, anytime I have a team member reach out and say, hey, I really learned from this thing you shared, that goes in the gas in the tank folder. So when I'm feeling a little low on gas, I'm feeling low in self-confidence, I don't know if I can do it, I go back to that folder and I remind myself of these accomplishments, and I encourage other new managers to do the same thing. And that's been really helpful.
Yeah, I think it goes also, there's another paradigm with this, as far as on our end with the self-aware leader, caring goes a long way. Like, when you're new, if you get the point to where, and we'll talk about the extreme of this, getting buddy next, but are too friendly with people. But, whenever you're caring, like actually like listening to superpower, I think that goes a long way as a new manager, just taking the time to listen, like walk around, talk to people. Like I said, I had a manager friend, and he was in a factory. And everybody else is older and they've been there for 30 years, 25, 30 years, it's like you're 65-year-olds. Like, what do you do with that? And their biggest complaint was manager doesn't listen to them. No management listens to them. They make decisions without, they don't talk to them. They don't even talk to the engineers. They're on their own little C-suite up inside. So he kind of became that guy. He became very like a linchpin, became super valuable. And then, cause he could communicate on both sides.
Right. Oh, it's huge. Yeah, people want to be listened to. And if they've only had managers that feel like they know more than their people, and then you show up and you actually lend them a listening ear, that makes all the difference in the world. And I know a lot of the managers I work with training, they're looking for ways for their team to trust them. They want to earn that respect with the team. And I think you nailed it, Jason, is that one of the biggest ways to earn respect is to give respect.
Yes.
Listen to other people. Be self-aware of the fact that they really want to be heard. All of us want to be heard. And then the other thing that was really a superpower for me when I started out in that new role is I went and I tried to find the hardest job that everybody was doing on my team. And I showed them, I'm willing to do this with you. So at Target, we would have these trucks show up from the distribution center filled with tons and tons of boxes packed out before Black Friday or back to school or Christmas. And the toughest job was known to be what they called, quote unquote, throwing the truck, which is getting in the truck and you're the one lifting all the boxes and doing all the heavy labor and passing it down the line. So I said, I'm gonna throw the truck. I'm going to go in and do this. And an executive had never done that before in the store. Nobody ever goes in with all the team and throws the truck with them. And I realized little things like that, helping people feel heard, helping them feel seen, doing the work alongside them, it had a profound impact in my relationship with these team members because they felt like I'm part of it with them. I want to show them I'm in it with you.
Yeah, and I don't want to be mean with new leaders, but I always say this to them too. I'm a little bit more blunt. I was in the Marine Corps. Imposter syndrome comes from you being narcissistic a lot of times, and you're making it all about yourself. If you're a servant leader, Simon Sinek, I know you probably read this, leaders eat last. So and he got that from the military, the Marine Corps, and he
Right.
always, the higher up you got into the Marine Corps, the more you had servant leadership. And people are always amazed when I talk to him. It's like once you got up to like out of boot camp and out of your training, no one yelled at each other.
Yeah.
And I was in the Marines, like we were, in war. No one was yelling at each other. Like that's not, it's a misconception of what the people now in boot camp, they have to train you and do all that. So it was very decentralized, very, let's let you lead. Let's let you handle your team. Let's let you do your thing. Just come back to us. The leaders, like colonels and stuff, like the high up guys, they would never hardly talk. They would just listen.
Yeah, I love that.
And so I think a lot of times imposter syndrome comes from this ability where you want to be so narcissistic and make it centered about you, then you're just running around talking all this whole time. I have this new role, look at me. And then no one responds to that narcissism because they don't care. They've been there for 30 years. They've seen 100.
Totally. Yeah. Well, I totally faced that too. I was talking about how I came in as this young buck in my early teens and I have an MBA and I think I'm hot shit. And I walk in the store. Nobody else cares about that stuff. Nobody else cares about your MBA. Nobody cares about your credentials. Nobody cares about what you did at your last job. They care about what you can do for them. What you can do for them, how you show up for them, how you make them feel. That's how you make an impact.
Yeah, I love that. And I want to get into another mistake that new managers make, and that's being too friendly or buddy.
Yeah.
So, I had this, I think a lot of this comes as a new manager. Being in a seasoned manager and figuring it out, you can have, of course, have the lunches, go have the drinks, whatever, go on the golf course, all those things. But especially I think when you're transitioning into the new manager and you still have the people in the same company and you're kind of, thinking you're equal with them. What mistake do you see in that with new managers with being too friendly?
Yeah, well, I have a personal story of that I got thrown in that position unexpectedly, that back about 9 years ago, I got a promotion to be my boss's boss, which was such a weird thing to happen. But I had thrown my hat in the ring along with 10 other people to become the director of our client services department. And so my boss applied for it. All these other people applied for it. Tons of people that had experience in the company. For whatever reason, I got picked and I was elated, but I was also freaked out because now suddenly I'm the director of this 160 person department. And so one of the complications of that is two of my best friends, Eric and Alex, were both in my department. And I've been friends with these guys for years. I recruited them to the company. I brought them into the fold basically. And now they're in this department that I'm running. And so I got thrown into this and I had to decide, what do I do with this whole weird situation? And so I think if you're in that kind of position that you're managing people that you previously had been peers with or in a team with, and then you're suddenly leading them, one of the biggest things you can do is have a conversation with that person outside of work and just call out the elephant in the room. So I did that. I talked to both of them and I said, hey, this is kind of weird. I know this is a little bit different. I respect the heck out of both of you. I want to keep our friendship. We've been friends for many years, but we need to change the dynamic of how we show up in the office because I don't want anyone to think that I'm giving you favoritism. I'm going to bow out. I'm going to recuse myself of any performance review stuff that you have, any one-on-one conversations, any of that kind of stuff you have going out. Someone else is running all of that, because we are just too close. I also can't share company secrets with you. Right. Knowledge is power. And so we had previously talked about all these different company all hands meeting. What did you think of it? And what do you think is going on next? I actually had access to the room for some of that kind of stuff. I was in board meetings then. I couldn't share that with them because that would give them a higher pedestal of knowledge than every one of their peers. And so I think call that out explicitly if you are already friends with people. And then if you're put into a position that, let's say you don't have friends on the team yet, you get promoted from the outside as a manager and you're now running a team, I would say try not to go be buddy with everybody. Don't make everybody your best friend. And so generally what I tell all of our new managers is that if you have a team of people that you really want to be close with, you're meeting all of these people, you want to form relationships, recognize that there's a difference between a work relationship as a manager.
Yes.
Versus trying to bring that into the outside world as a friend. And it just really simplifies things down to not go and form a bunch of new friendships. So I would encourage everybody, set boundaries, set really clear boundaries. Everything from, will you be social media friends with somebody? You should know that. Do you friend people on Instagram and Snapchat if they're work acquaintances or not? How do you interact with people at happy hours? Do you have drinks with your team members outside of work? Do you go to team birthday parties? Make your decision on that kind of stuff and then set an equal standard for everyone. So it's not this perception of unfairness.
Yeah, I had that. I had a real awakening as a young manager. I didn't catch on that I was thinking like all of a sudden, all these cool people, like the coolest people are talking to me. And this hot chick is talking to me too that works there, and then I'm like, what the hell's going on? I didn't catch in my mind that I was the boss now.
Right.
All of a sudden, I thought that maybe something happened. It was so silly. Like, it's so silly to think. So here I am, like, of course I'll be these people's friends. And this girl and I'm even going to risk my career to go out with this girl, that is much lower, position than I am. And it turned out okay because I had somebody come to me. I had an older, like, vice president type come to me and say, hey, people are noticing, like that girl sitting in your office for an hour or two. Are you guys having lunch together? Like, people notice that stuff. Like, and then people talk. Like, eventually somebody's going to have a conversation with you, and then you're only talking to the only people I would talk to are like the superstar guys, in the sales or whatever. And so then it ended up turning into, like a clique, of the cool kids. And they were only doing it because they'd be like, hey boss, I'm going to take off for the afternoon. And I developed this clique and didn't even realize it. And then everybody on the outskirts would not even hardly communicate with me, and I didn't even realize it, So I think the buddy too friendly can be very detrimental.
It can be really hard, to deal with all that kind of stuff. And it's almost like the other side of the imposter syndrome issue is that people that jump into a new manager role, you feel imposter syndrome because you haven't been there before.
Right.
You also haven't been there before as someone that other people look up to as, oh, they're the boss.
Yes.
And you don't realize that being the boss comes with power. It comes with responsibility. And some of the power people want to tap into. They want to go do the lunch thing you were talking about. They want to be friends with you. And that's all well and good. That's fine. But you need to recognize that there's a difference, again, between being a work connection with someone and trying to build them up as a colleague versus going and trying to be buddy with them and having drinks on the side. The latter gets really dicey really fast.
Yes, it does.
And so I think it's important for everyone to draw those clear boundaries and to know what are your rules as a manager that you're going to follow for yourself.
Yeah, I had an old leader tell me, like for me, if you're attracted to the opposite sex, then look at them as like your sister or brother, and then try to operate in that direction, like catch yourself on that, because I see that happen so many times with new managers. They get caught up in that. Another thing too, I think, with the buddy, like you said, is there are people that are out there that are manipulators, and they will be quick to hop onto a new manager and manipulate you, negative or positive, or they'll be an antagonist, on purpose. That's what they've done to every manager that's come in there. But you're not realizing that person is, related to the CEO or whatever. So you have to be really careful. Like you said, this is a whole new role. And that's what I want to get into next, because we're kind of talking about like team dynamics. New managers giving regular feedback to their team. Now I want to take this in two parts, Bobby, because I think it's important. Giving feedback when you're a brand new manager that could turn into a shit show. But then also not giving feedback after you've been there for 6 months or whatever. Let's address the first question. You're brand new. I'm going to start doing coaching.
Yeah.
I'm going to pull people into my office and tell them what they're doing, good and bad. What does that look like?
Yeah, well, it's another one of the classic problems people struggle with. So when people ask me, what are the biggest challenges new managers have? Reliably, delegation is always on the list. Reliably giving feedback is always on the list. So I'll start out with a story, just because I think through stories, and like it's I think that the vehicle for us to learn these types of ideas. So when I first started out in that target role, I found out within the first couple weeks I was working there that I had a team lead that reported to me that had been at the company for 5 years and that he had been really struggling with performance. I've never given anyone big substantive feedback before, and my district manager calls me over and says, hey, this guy, we'll call him Mark, pseudonym. This guy, Mark, he has been here 5 years. Everyone's scared to death of him because he's this big, burly football player guy. He played football in college, and he's really intimidating. So no one's given him feedback for years, and we need to fire him. Mark is not a good fit for the team. You need to start giving him feedback and ultimately fire this guy. So I'm freaking out. I've never done this kind of thing before. I've given people feedback in team meetings in college, and it's just not the same, right? So ultimately, I end up giving all of this feedback to Mark, and I made all the classic mistakes. So classic mistake is I avoided it for a little while. Another classic mistake is I gave it way too soft. I knew Mark's job was in jeopardy, but I baby stepped the feedback and I would say, oh, Mark, I think that you might maybe need to do this a little bit better. And I wasn't speaking directly and confidently enough. So it is awkward. It is weird being a new manager trying to get feedback like that. But you can cut through all of that with a really simple 3-step model. So this is the model I teach all of our managers at the company to use. It's the SBI model. Share situation, what happened that the person made a mistake, behavior, what did you do or not do, and impact. Situation, behavior, impact. You did or didn't do this thing in this call, and it had this impact on our company. It has this impact on a client, this impact on a prospect. So you can use that model and you can, no joke, give feedback in and out in 30 seconds or 60 seconds, really quick. You rip off the Band-Aid and you don't share all this other hedging stuff that I had made the mistake of sharing early on. And so I think there are good models out there to use, but a lot of it comes back to you got to do the hard thing. Feedback is hard. You got to do it. You got to find some kind of simple model to use, like this SBI model, and then you have to role play that feedback. So that's another thing that's really uncomfortable. I'm sure you've been involved in a lot of role plays through the years, whether it's sales or feedback or whatever. You got to practice giving that message. And so I eventually did that with Mark. I had to practice and role play with somebody else before my one-on-ones with Mark. I would give Mark feedback, and then gradually the feedback landed more and more, and I became more and more candid with Mark.
Yeah, that's so good. I think another way that when we view feedback that can be super toxic, and I fell into this role, being a new manager, was the me versus the team versus, upper management, C-suite. And then I would go to the meeting and not make a leadership situation happen, with feedback. What I would do is be like, hey guys, I just was talking to the chief financial officer and he's fucking pissed,
Yeah.
and he's he's going to do that. I would not take responsibility of my role in being the leader. And I'd be like, what are we going to do, guys? Like, we got to figure this shit out. Like he was on my ass, and then they'd be like, well, let's do that. We're going to do this. And the collaboration was good, but they didn't see me as the leader. And then what had ended up happening was I had another C-suite person come to me and say, hey, are you like talking shit? Like, because some of the other employees were quick to give that information, to them. So, feedback can be really toxic too at the same time.
It can be. Well, and by doing that, which I've made that mistake too, exactly what you said. By doing that, you cuckold yourself as a leader, that you make it clear, I have no power.
Yeah.
Only these other people have power, and they're telling me to come and talk to you.
Yes.
So that's not good. But it also, it's so oppositional of turning people against upper leadership. And I got to see the outcome of that back at a past job. We had a manager that would get glowing reviews on the culture surveys we sent out on the question of, what do you think of your direct boss? You got glowing reviews, but then all of his team on the same reviews blitzed upper management. There was a question of, what do you feel about upper management in our company? Red, all throughout the board. So I look at that, and I've been leading for a while now at this point. So I pull that manager aside and I said, hey, guess what I'm seeing? Why do you think I'm seeing this? And very quickly he goes, it's because I've been blaming things on the CEO. It's because I've been blaming things on our VPs. And I said, yeah, you have been. I can tell. Your team hates everybody above you, but they adore you because you're playing this buddy nice guy.
Yeah.
And you just can't do that, because ultimately it's bad for those people's engagement. They want to leave the company because they don't feel like they're working for a good company. And you're not courageously owning what you need to own as a leader. Leadership is hard. You got to own that stuff. And it has to be a message from you, not from some higher power.
Yeah, it's like, if you look at it, because I always like to look in like relationship wise, whether you're with the partner or whatever, and you never took responsibility for anything. And you always had a boogeyman or something to blame. Well, I fucked up, and so, it was because of this,
Yeah.
No one wants to be in a relationship with you.
No, it sucks. And in the short term, it might make you feel good for a little while. You're dodging the bullet and you feel like, oh, I'm getting the message across and I'm not the bad guy. In the long term, it always bites you. And yeah, it's just a huge mistake people make. I'm so glad you mentioned that, because that's something that comes up quite a bit, actually.
Yeah. It's easy. It's
Yeah.
easy to play. You're playing a victim, basically, like you said, and then you're not being a leader. I also think on the feedback, because I feel like this is so important, is coaching and having one-on-ones. And a lot of managers are so busy running around, doing the, like you had said earlier, the emergencies or whatever you call it,
Yeah.
taking the time to do one-on-ones with somebody, giving them feedback in the sense of coaching. What is that? What do you see with that? And how many managers do you actually think do that consistently?
Yeah, it depends wildly on the company. So there are some companies that are very pro one-on-one. I'm very pro one-on-one. I've seen the power of it. There are other companies that don't prioritize it. And if the upper leadership doesn't prioritize it, managers oftentimes skip out of doing that
Right,
because it takes a lot of time. But I think it's huge to do that. One-on-ones are one of the biggest levers that you have to pull with managing team performance. And I see managers make two big mistakes with one-on-ones. One is that they cancel them a lot. If you cancel it, your team feels bad. They feel undervalued.
Yeah.
That you have better things to do. So that's something you definitely should not be doing. Two is that managers feel like those meetings are boring.
Yes.
And that to me points to the fact that you're just not leading them the right way. One-on-one should actually be really interesting, really involved, and there should be a ton of stuff you're covering. So specifically with our managers, I train all managers to use a 4 grid, 4 topics that you should be hitting on these topics in your one-on-ones. One of those parts of the 4 grid that we use is team and task stuff. It's like the tactical work. How's the work going? How your client's doing? But the biggest mistake people make is they only stay in that box. That's 1/4 of what I think should be doing. But most people only play in that box in their one-on-one. So of course it's going to get boring. You're just talking about all the tactical stuff. Other boxes you should cover, 3 other things: personal stuff, feedback, and then career growth. So those 3 things, if you do those 3 things in addition to team and tasks, you end up hearing what is impacting that person outside of work that shows up in the 4 walls of their workplace. What's going on personally for them? You end up being able to share feedback with them and then get feedback from them. And it really should be a 2-way street, and you should be talking about that frequently. And then you should be talking about their career. So those 4 things: career development, team and task stuff, personal details, and then sharing feedback. That to me, that's a complete one-on-one. You're maybe not doing that every time, but over the span of a month or 2, all those topics really should be hit.
Yeah, that's so great. Especially, I want to stick with the personal one, because this can be kind of dicey. But what I'm talking about, I had this experience, and I'm so glad I had read a coaching book before I had this conversation with this person. It was interesting because she would come into work almost crying. And everybody would know that she would be like upset. And then she would kind of be like passive aggressive and kind of like moody. And I was like, I can't have this person working here anymore. It's just, the culture that's not what we are here. We're usually try to be really positive. And I had a conversation with her, and we did the personal grid.
Yeah.
And, I compassionately just straight out asked her. And all it was, it's so funny, to her, it was a 10. But all it was her getting her kids up in the morning and then they changed the school times or whatever, and then her trying to get to work. And all I had to say was, what's the time difference from when you're stressed out to and she goes, it's about 40 minutes. And I was like, what if you came to work 40 minutes later and then you just work 40 minutes longer?
Yeah. I love that.
How would that? And she's like, she almost like started, but like her eyes got like real watery. She's like, she said, you would do that? And I was like, of course, it's just numbers on clocks.
Yeah.
That was, and totally different person, like 180-degree out, different person for 40 minutes. And I got a ton of work after her, and she trusted me after that, So that personal box is so important.
It's so big because it really does bleed into the other boxes. You can pretend it doesn't exist, pretend the person doesn't have kids, pretend they don't have pets that are going to the vet this week, pretend they don't have depression outside of work. You can pretend that stuff doesn't exist and put your head in the sand. It will still impact their work. And taking that example you shared, I think a lot of new managers, if they were put in your shoes in that situation, they would have had a performance management conversation with that person. They would have given them feedback rather than asking questions, and they would have maybe fired them.
Yes.
And what a massive loss for the organization and for her if that had been how it went down, rather than you going in with empathy and compassion and asking a few questions instead.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, like in the sense of even this work at home, like a lot of, there's pros and cons to that. But I think a lot of, I work at home, and I think there's a lot of pros to it if you have the right person in a position and they're able to do that. And there's also a different way to lead. You got to have more feedback, because I have employees, I have employees that are in California and in New York and, in Florida. Now everybody's moved to Florida, in Texas. Having that regular feedback is the lifeline when you have, when you're Zoom calling all the time.
Yeah, and really feedback's one of those things that the more you do it, the less scary it is.
Yes.
If you do it twice a year in performance reviews, it's this big scary thing. Like, oh man, I've got my one-on-one with Jason. He's going to blast me with feedback from the last 6 months. That sucks. Nobody wants that. But if you give feedback every month or several times a month in all your one-on-ones, it just becomes normalized. And we train people to think of feedback as data. If I get one data point from someone that says, oh, hey, I think you need to change this in your approach. Okay, I've got one data point. They might be wrong. They might be right. I'm not really sure.
Mm-hmm.
But if I have a second data point and a third data point, oh man, I got to change something.
Yeah.
Because now there's a lot of data building up that says I need to make a change. So I think feedback, normalizing that is really the goal, or should be the goal of any manager out there, is make your people used to hearing it and make your people hopefully used to sharing it with you as well.
One-on-ones, I think if you don't have time for them, like you said, I haven't prioritized them, because I would tell my employees, like, if I haven't done a one-on-one, that means I'm dead. Like, that's my number one thing, because I learned once I delegate, I have plenty of time to do one-on-ones. That's mostly all I do. I don't do a lot of the work, which this is going to sound weird for managers. You don't have to do a lot of the work. You just have to do the one-on-ones. That's your job now, is to do those. And if you do the one-on-ones right, the delegating happens in that process too.
It does.
And it becomes even, one of the things that I love, and I want you to talk about this, is when you're doing the one-on-ones, you're delegating in that one-on-one. But the cool part about it is when they begin to trust you and you keep doing these one-on-ones, they volunteer. You don't have to delegate. They say, hey, boss, I know I saw this. I really would like to take this project on. What do you think about that? Yeah. That happens all the time.
It does. Well, and it happens organically the more comfortable they feel with you. And so I would even encourage people, try to do a one-on-one in a non-regular format. So if regular for you is doing Zoom calls in a remote office, pick up your phone, both go on a walk in your respective places and chat on the phone. Yes. I've noticed that people open up more on the phone.
Yes, you're right.
Because it puts you in this different mindset of, I'm just out, I'm walking, it's 75 degrees and sunny outside. I feel good. I'm going to share this with Jason. So do it in a non-standard format. If you're in a physical office, you're co-located together and you're used to doing one-on-ones in an office conference room, break the mold, go to a coffee shop, go out to lunch together, do something different. And again, this isn't to try to become buddy-buddy with somebody. It's to try to get them to open up. It's to try to get them to be more informal. So I think oftentimes the more informal someone is with you, the more comfortable and authentic they show up, the better you'll be able to lead them, because you end up hearing about all these other little things that you can connect their work to, motivators that they have, things they want to learn, anything else like that.
Yeah, it's so interesting, because this leads right into our next question is, how can new managers avoid micromanaging? Because now I'm doing the one-on-ones and I'm telling them what to do, and they're not responding, So accountability and micromanaging, this is a tough one for new managers.
It is. Yeah. It really comes down to what kind of decision is this? So if you want to avoid micromanaging, but you also want to avoid losing a big client, right? Like, and a lot of managers are worried, if I fully abdicate responsibility with this thing and I give it to this other person, they're going to maybe screw up and we're going to lose this big client. So I would say you should end up using a gauge of how strategic important is this thing? How risky is this to give over to them? And that should dictate how involved you end up being with them for that. And so the opposite of micromanagement isn't abdicating responsibility. It's finding a way to still be in touch and to still figure out, how do I stay connected to this thing? How do I support you, but not do it in a way that makes you feel like I'm hovering over your shoulder constantly?
That's so good. Yes.
Yeah. One of the biggest mistakes I made over and over again is if I was delegating a task to somebody, I would then not set any standard with them in the conversation about when we would touch base again. So then a week later, I would ask like, "Oh, how's that thing going, Jason? Oh yeah, I haven't heard about this. How's it going?" And I ended up hearing that that feels like micromanagement. You told me I could own this thing, and then a week later and 2 weeks later, you're asking questions about it. So I realized that I had been making that mistake and I had to change my approach. And when I delegate the work, I had to actually be explicit and clear about when are we going to touch base? How do you want to do that? Do you want to send me proactive emails? Do you want me to touch base in a month? What is this going to look like from here? And ever since I flipped that and I changed my approach, it completely changed the perception of micromanagement I didn't feel like I was over their shoulder anymore, but I still got to let them decide how are you going to keep me in the loop. And I don't really care. You can decide however you want to do it, but I want to be kept in the loop. And you and I can negotiate and figure out what that looks like and how involved I should be.
That's so good. That's so good, Bobby. I think another thing with and we had talked about this earlier, but clear expectations. When you're giving a job, especially if you're middle management, new management, you probably didn't get clarity when you had the CMO ran past you real quick and said, "Hey bro, can you get your team to where we need some sales enablement materials, blah, blah, blah. Maybe you could talk to me later on that." And then you run to your team.
Yeah.
And you don't know what it's for, the departments. So I think getting clear expectations, it's so important. It's like super simple questions like, "Hey, can we schedule a time to do this? I want to make sure we win on this. So I need to gain clarity." Tell them your bosses as a manager, "I need to gain clarity on what a perfect win for you looks like in detail. And then I want to accomplish that for you."
Yes.
And then if you get that in detail from them, I had, and like you said, communicating up and down, this is so important. It's like, how do you communicate? Ask them, what do they prefer? You want to? I did that once with the boss that I had. He's like, "I want once a week us meet together one-on-one, and I want you to give me a PowerPoint presentation." I was like, "Okay, I could do that. That's easy." He's like, "I don't like emails." I was like, "Well, I usually do emails."
Yeah.
So in my head, I'm like, "Okay, I'll save all my emails, make them slides.
Yeah.
And then once a week, we're going to roll." And he loved it,
Yeah.
So find your up and down. What way do people like to communicate? And that will save a lot in what you're talking about, in this mistake, because this is a big one. And I think people don't even realize they're micromanaging.
So delegate the what, and then give context and explain why that has to be done, and let them decide how to do it. Let them figure out exactly how that has to be done. So then they get to fully control what they're doing. Because I think in general, if I'm telling somebody to build a spreadsheet and give me, financial reports on something, and I delegate this over to them, but then I tell them what has to be in every column of the spreadsheet. I tell them exactly how to do it. I hate that. And other people hate that. So we have to let people decide exactly how to do something. And that then feels like they can then soar with their own wings. They can do whatever they need to do because they're figuring out how to get it done.
Yeah. Don't ever go to somebody's cubicle or their desk and hover over them and be like, "What are you working on?"
Yeah.
That's the same thing. It's like, put this in this Excel column,
Yeah.
It's so horrific. Micromanaging to me as a person, if somebody did that to me, it's disrespectful and I don't want to work for them.
Yeah.
So
It's
and
huge.
you'll have personality. So if you want like the top tier people, a lot of them are entrepreneurial and they're dying to own something. When it comes to accountability and ensuring that things are getting done, I know you talk about like communicating properly with the person and having them, give feedback back to how they can be accountable to you. Do you have any other good suggestions on accountability?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of performance management comes down to two things. It's setting really clear expectations and then holding people accountable to those expectations. That's it. It's really just those two things. Set expectations, make them really clear, explain the why, like we were talking about, and then hold people accountable to those expectations. The accountability for those expectations, it oftentimes looks like one-on-ones. Like what we were just talking about, you should be revisiting the ongoing tasks in those one-on-ones. The accountability looks like feedback, and it looks like oftentimes showing them an example of, hey, this is a time that I've worked on a project like that. This is what was really helpful for me to do. What do you need support on? And you're basically deferring to them on how they need you to be in the ballpark to give accountability for them.
Yeah, and I think that it's so important. I want to get to the next part, Bobby, on because this goes right in hand in what you're talking about in making mistakes What role does self-reflection play in that? And how does it help new managers avoid making mistakes? No one wants to make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. Self-reflection is huge. So I think any manager should have their own kind of personal journaling practice.
Mm,
You should have a practice of reflecting back on your day. So one of the things that I'll do is I'll try to take note of mistakes that I made or things that people shared feedback with me that maybe in the moment it was really hard to hear. And I want to take that in the evening. I want to take that at 9 p.m. that night and I want to self-reflect on that. I want to journal on that. I want to figure out taking off all of my emotions. What's just the nitty-gritty details of this thing? How did I screw up? What do I wish I knew differently? And I think for any manager out there, you should be constantly asking yourself, if I could replay this situation, or if I could teach another new manager how to do this situation, what would I tell them? What would I share with that person? And that should be infused in all the self-reflection and journaling that we do. So self-reflection is big enough for me. I book a solo retreat twice per year that I go and I stay out in the mountains somewhere. I book an Airbnb somewhere remote and I go and I stay in a cabin by myself for sometimes as short as 2 nights, sometimes as long as 5 nights. And I just bring a journal, I bring some books and I go take long walks and I try to think about what do I want out of my career? Where have I messed up recently?
mhm.
What do I need to learn to be successful at this next stage? So for any individual manager, you have to find your way of doing that, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, that's so good. I do the same thing. It's funny. Every year I do the same thing.
Hello?
Well,
Yeah.
I'll go to a hotel, whatever. One of the things I do on that is, as you grow in a leader, vision becomes really important.
Yeah.
And I never paid attention to vision until I went to a big mega church and saw, and I'm not saying like being religious or anything like that. Somebody invited me, so I went, and the whole thing was vision. And then I got this Craig Golshall is his name, and he's a leadership guru. He has a leadership podcast, but he's also this mega church pastor. And he's like, how do you get hundreds of people to volunteer every week? You have to put vision in front of them constantly. And so I began to I was like, wow, this is something I can learn on leadership. So I got all these megachurch pastors and found out they made leadership books, and most of it was about vision. So now when I do that, I'm always like, especially at the end of the year, I'll be like, what vision? What do I want to have? And you could do this with your team or the organization but for me, it's like, what do I want the company to be focused on this next year? How can I make the vision ultra crystal clear where I'm just repeating it almost, ad nausea, and that's one of the things I do too, is because if I can get the vision down, then I have the why of what
Yeah.
we're doing and how we as servants are leading, if that makes sense.
Well, it connects to another Simon Sinek book of Start With Why. It's all about vision casting, explain why this is so important. I think that's another part that new managers really tend to struggle with is that when you're just managing for the first time, your head is down. You're looking at all the technical work, and so much of your day to day for the last God knows how many years has been tactical work after tactical work. It's just been pounding through tasks. But now when you become a manager, a lot of your work has to be strategic in nature. And when I say strategic, I mean it's thinking about tomorrow, not just today. It's not just fighting today's fires, it's preventing tomorrow's fires. And it's trying to cast that vision for where you want your team to be. So going back to when I got that big promotion back years ago, when I was leading this team of 160 people, I realized really quickly, I have to cast a vision. I have to tell people where we're headed. So I chose 3 things that we wanted to be a lot better at as a department in the next year. And I said, we're going to get better at these 3 things, and basically spelled those out for everybody and tried to cast that story and that vision of where we wanted to be, and fully acknowledged, I don't have the answers on all this stuff yet. I need all of your help. We all need to band together on this, but here's what tomorrow should look like. Let's try to get there together. And so I think for any new manager, once you pull your head up out of the weeds and you start looking at the strategic stuff, you have to figure out a way to paint tomorrow for your team.
Yeah, that's so good. And I think that leads me to my last question on, we're coming up on the hour. This has been amazing, Bobby. When new managers, they're focusing on the big picture, how do you catch yourself when you're getting lost in those day-to-day tasks?
Yeah, so you should really know what your top 2 or 3 core metrics are for whatever your team needs to achieve. And those things, you should be laser focused on anything that you can do to move the needle on those. So I'll give a practical example. Let's say you're running a client services team. You have a bunch of CSMs that are reporting to you that have account books that they're managing. And if you're in that role leading a bunch of client success managers, your top metrics might be things like net promoter score. So how likely people are to promote you to other clients out there. It might be client retention. It might be how many people are willing to serve as a reference for you with the sales and marketing team. So whatever those core metrics are, you should know what those things are.
Right.
And then you should make sure that you're spending an awful lot of your weekly calendar on those three things. And if you find that you're weighed down in a bunch of different tactical details, if you're still pulling all the old reports, the manual work you used to do before your promotion, if you're still doing all that old stuff, you're probably not doing your new job. You need to take off the old hat and put on the new hat and figure out ways to be more strategic in nature. And yes, that usually involves doing things that feel a little bit scary. It feels a little bit risky. It's less safe because you're not as comfortable doing it, but you have to figure out ways to do that. And sometimes those strategic things, it's like meeting your top 10 clients for the group of clients that you represent. So if there's 100 clients, you go meet the top 10 of them. And it's spending time with your teams and things like one-on-ones, like we talked about.
Yeah, I love that. And this is a perfect close. Everybody go to bobbypowers.com. Make sure, and we'll have the links in the show note, and subscribe to your Substack. So everybody that subscribes to my Substack, go subscribe to yours. I encourage everyone to do that. Let's do that together as a community. Thank you, Bobby. This was amazing. This is great. We're going to help a lot of new managers. This is going to
Yeah, I love it. Thanks again, Jason. And yeah, great to spend this time with you.